All right, so let's talk about ADA accommodations. Something we all see but maybe don't totally get, like those ramps you see everywhere. Turns out that's like just the beginning. There's so much more to ADA accommodations than a lot of people think.
You got that right. And for small businesses here in Texas, figuring out all the ins and outs of the ABA, well, it can be tricky. That's where the unit consulting comes in. They really know their stuff when it comes to helping businesses create a workplace that works for everyone, while making sure everything's legal and above board.
And that's exactly why we're doing a deep dive today into this recent article from the unit consulting. It's all about reasonable accommodations. Whether you're a business owner or an employee or just curious, this is for you.
So let's start with the basics. What exactly are we talking about when we say reasonable accommodations?
Well, the article says it's about making changes so employees with disabilities can do their jobs.
And here's the thing. It's not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. For example, you have a cashier who needs a stool to sit on because of a leg injury. That makes sense, right? But if you've got a construction worker who's moving around all day, a stool wouldn't really work for them.
So it's about making things fair. Not about giving anyone special treatment. It's about figuring out what each person needs to succeed in their job.
Exactly. And the article has some good examples, like someone who can't see well might need screen reading software to use a computer. Providing that software would be a reasonable accommodation. Or let's say an employee has a chronic illness and they need a flexible schedule to go to doctor's appointments. That could also be a reasonable accommodation.
I can already see how this could get complicated. Because at some point, these accommodations could be a real burden on employers, right?
You're getting at a key legal idea here, undue hardship. Basically, the ADA gets that employers can't be expected to do things that would be really hard or expensive for their business.
So it's not like employees can just ask for anything. There are limits. So tell me about these undue hardship factors. What do employers have to consider?
The unit consulting lays it all out in their article. They talk about four main factors. First, there's the accommodation itself, like how much it costs. Let's say an employee wants a piece of equipment that costs a ton of money, and that's a big chunk of the business's budget.
Yeah, like a small bookstore probably couldn't afford to put in an elevator just because one employee needs it.
Exactly. And that brings us to the second factor, the financial resources of the employer. A huge corporation is going to have a lot more wiggle room than a small business.
Okay, so size does matter in this case. What are the other two factors?
The third is the impact on how things run. If an accommodation would totally disrupt the work or cause big problems for other employees, it might be considered an undue hardship. Think of a restaurant where everyone has a specific job and they're all working together in sync. If one accommodation messes up that flow, it could hurt everyone.
That makes sense. It's all about finding the right balance. What's the last factor?
It's about the number of employees and the type of business. Like a small team of 5 people might have trouble doing flexible work hours in a way that a big company with lots of departments could easily manage.
Okay, so we've got these 4 factors that help figure out what's reasonable and what's an undue hardship. But how does this actually work in the real world? Seems like there's a lot of room for misunderstandings and conflicts.
Yeah, you're right. Things could definitely go wrong. That's why the ADA talks about this thing called the interactive process.
Interactive process, huh? Sounds kind of official. So what does that actually mean?
It's really all about talking to each other and working together. It's more like a conversation, not like a fight or something. The employer and the employee need to work together, to figure out what's making things hard for the employee and see what they can do about it.
So it's not as easy as an employee saying, hey, doc says I need this. It's more complicated than that.
Right. The article makes a big deal about looking at different options. Maybe there's a solution that's even better than what the employee first thought of. It's about solving the problem together.
Okay, so let's say I need an accommodation at work. What's the best way to talk to my boss about it?
First, be ready to explain what your disability is and how it affects your work. And it helps to have some ideas about what might help. Don't just talk about the problem. Focus on finding a solution together.
That makes sense. Now, what about employers? What should they remember during this interactive process?
Write everything down. It's important to have documentation. It protects both the employer and the employee. Keep track of the accommodation requests, the conversations you have, and the decisions you make. That way, if there are any problems later, you've got everything in writing.
So it's not just about having a friendly chat. It's about keeping a record. Anything else employers should be aware of?
Remember, this isn't just about following the law. Providing reasonable accommodations is actually good for business.
Oh, really? How so?
Think about it. When you make accommodations for your employees, you're creating a workplace where everyone feels welcome and supported. That can make employees happier, and they'll be more likely to stay with the company. Plus, they might even be more productive.
So it's about making sure everyone feels valued
Yeah,
and like they can do their best work.
exactly. And finding good employees is hard these days. So if your company has a reputation for being good to people with disabilities, that can help you attract top talent.
So there's a good reason to be excited about accommodations, not just worried about getting sued.
You got it. It's a
And
win-win situation.
okay, let's be real for a second. We know that even when people are trying their best, sometimes things go wrong. What happens if an employer messes up? Maybe they don't do it on purpose, or maybe they just don't understand the rules. Are there consequences for not following the ADA?
Definitely. The article talks about how not providing reasonable accommodations or misunderstanding what an undue hardship is can lead to serious problems like lawsuits and fines. Plus, it can hurt the company's reputation. It's not something to mess around with.
No kidding. No business wants to deal with a lawsuit, especially a small or medium-sized business. They might not have the money to fight it.
Exactly. And that's where the unit consulting comes in. They can really help businesses navigate this stuff. They can do everything from checking if you're following the rules
Yeah.
to creating policies that fit your specific needs.
So they're like a safety net, helping businesses stay on track and avoid those legal problems. It's like having an HR expert you can call anytime you need help.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. If anyone listening is feeling lost about the ADA, I definitely recommend reaching out to the unit consulting. They're based right here in Texas, so they know all about the state's regulations.
I agree. They offer the kind of personalized help that small and medium-sized businesses need. And I remember from the article, their number is 956-230-6866. Write that down, everyone. It's a good number to have.
It's always good to have experts you can trust, especially when it comes to something as important as this.
So today we've been talking about ADA accommodations. We learned what reasonable accommodations means, and we explored that idea of undue hardship and those 4 important factors.
We talked about the importance of communication and working together to find solutions.
And we talked about the risks of not following the ADA and how the unit consulting can help businesses in Texas.
But before we wrap up, I want to switch gears for a minute and leave you with something to think about. We've been talking a lot about work, but accommodations are important outside of the office, too.
Like, think about when you're out and about. Have you ever noticed those ramps that make it easier to get up on the sidewalk? Or those curb cuts? Or what about Braille on signs? Or those audio descriptions they have at some museums?
Those are all accommodations that make it easier for everyone to use public spaces and services. And it's not just people with disabilities who benefit, it helps a lot of people.
That's so true. I read this article once about how curb cuts, which were originally designed for wheelchairs, they've ended up being super helpful for all kinds of people, like parents with strollers, and delivery people with those hand trucks, even older folks who have trouble walking.
Exactly. Accommodations often help more people than you might think.
So it's not just about following the rules, it's about making a world where everyone can participate, no matter what their abilities are.
And when you think about it like that, it's not about special treatment. It's about treating everyone with dignity and respect.
I like that. It's about recognizing that everyone deserves the same opportunities. And sometimes that means we need to get a little creative to make things work for everyone.
And that's where that idea of working together comes in. Whether we're talking about work or just life in general, it's about finding solutions that benefit everybody.
So here's what I'm taking away from today's deep dive. Let's all pay more attention to the accommodations around us, big and small. And let's think about how we can each help to create a world that's more inclusive and accessible for everyone.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Even small changes can make a difference, and when we all work together, it can have a huge impact.
A big thank you to the Unit Consulting for all this food for thought. If you're a business owner in Texas and you're looking for some expert help with ADA compliance or anything else HR related, give them a call at 956-230-6866.
They're a great resource for businesses,
Okay.
especially if you don't have a whole HR department.
Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive. We hope you learned something new and maybe even got inspired to see the world a little differently.
Until next time, keep learning, keep exploring, and keep diving deep.